Okay, greetings and welcome everybody. My name is Jake Rayson. I am a forest gardener and forest garden designer in West Wales, and I'm doing a regular slot on Wednesday mornings. That's British summertime, 10 o'clock to about 11:30. The first hour is me talking with a slideshow, talking about a particular topic related to forest gardening, and then I'll go out to the garden and show some specific things. So today we are talking about the smaller forest garden, and thank you to Laura via Facebook for raising this. To be honest, this is one of the most popular blog posts that I've ever had, and it's the most relevant to a lot of people, I think. So it's for me, it really is the area that is the most important to promote, because to promote forest gardening, you can't just look at people with a half an acre garden. You need to be able to get the message out to people with normal size gardens. And we're very lucky here. I mean, that we have 8 acres in total. It's a lot of work, but we're very, very lucky. And there's about 3 acres under cultivation for forest gardens. So there's 3 separate forest gardens, but this is not normal. Most people have got a much smaller space, and I think it's really important to say you can have a forest garden in a smaller space. In fact, I'd kind of highly recommend it. So a bit about where you can find the talks. The slideshow for this talk will always be at forestgarden.wales/talks/small. I might update some of the links, but it's kind of left forever, so that will always be there. I am on Twitter as ForestGDN Wales, and I kind of mostly tweet about forest gardening things. Occasionally I'll get a bit annoyed at the government and their total lack of action in times of crisis, but apart from the occasional outburst, it's mostly about plants and what I'm up to around the forest garden. And yes, and I think it's worth also at this point, just want to make a kind of a point about forest gardens in general. Kind of my reason for doing forest gardens is because of the climate emergency, and the vast majority of governments, not just our governments over the past 20-30 years, who have known about the oncoming climate emergency and ecological emergency and have singularly failed to do anything about it. So it's incumbent upon us, the normal citizens, to do something, and I think forest gardens are a part of that. And actually the worth of forest gardens has been, it's really been shown here. Now, with the coronavirus pandemic, because you are able to grow food you can grow food at home, and it's more sustainable way of growing food and takes less time than annual vegetables. Now, this really, I must admit this, I must emphasize that annual vegetables, I still grow annual vegetables, and we're growing potatoes and beans and tomatoes and the like, and it's a transition for the family to move to perennial vegetables. And I'm growing perennial kale and buxton plantain and Chinese seed and all sorts of different things, but it takes a long time. It takes a while to get used to growing the plants, but also to cultivate them en masse and to get the hang of them and where they fit in with your diet and to change your diet. So it really is a process, but I do think that forest gardens have a critical role to play in providing food locally for people. And the key thing as well is that it's not, when you're planting a forest garden, you're planting for generations. You're not planting for yourself. It's not a selfish act, because long after you've gone, hopefully they will be providing food. You're planting a sweet chestnut tree or hazel trees, they will provide food for the people who come after you, in that area, in your house, in your community forest garden. So we need to plant the resilient food sources locally, and to get that started now. So I do think smaller forest garden is absolutely vital to get that message out, to get to say to people, you can grow a forest garden in a small space. So the slight rant there, but the rant over. What I'll do for today, I'm going to talk about principles again, and I kind of revisit this pretty much every week, really, when in any talk about forest gardens, and to talk about the kind of the ideas behind it and how you apply those ideas to a small space. And I've got it the wrong way around, actually. Sorry. Then we'll look at example gardens. I've designed a few forest gardens for a smaller space. I think it's just useful to see the kind of space I'm talking about and the kind of plants that you can put there. So then we'll look at the plants. I'm just going to change that. Oh, no, I'll move on. Right then. So forest garden principles, how they apply to a small forest garden. Excuse me while I have my cup of tea. Everything was a little bit broken this morning on the slideshow, so I had a lot of running around to do. Okay, and then did I say after the slideshow we'll go outside and I will talk about I've got a large tub from an ex-neighbour, and I'm going to plant it up with some plants, with some forest garden plants, to show you the kind of, you can have a small space, you can have forest garden in a tub, so long as you're using the same the principles. So what are those principles, and what is a forest garden? So, excuse me. I like to describe a forest garden as an orchard is a good starting point, because people can get an idea of what an orchard is, of kind of rows of fruit trees, and then imagine that this orchard has been left a bit wild. There's some patches there that are good for wildlife. There's a bit of bramble in the corner and some ivy on the walls, and then you've got some nut trees in the mix too. But you also have a range of plants that provide nutrition for the nutrients for the fruit trees. So, for example, you've got comfrey under the apple trees, and you've got a nitrogen fixing alder in the corner of the orchard. And then, rather than being underplanted with grass, as you can see in the photograph here, I don't know if you can make this out with the where is it? There it is. This is an orchard for a client of mine down the road. It's beautiful space. But rather than being underplanted with grass, it's underplanted with edible shrubs, like fruit bushes, black currants, red currants, thornless brambles, and perennial vegetables, kind of herbaceous perennial vegetables. And there's a ground cover there as well, like a permanent living ground cover too. So that's the kind of idea. It's a kind of orchard, but it's a orchard on all different levels and a whole load of different crops. So the key defining characteristics of a forest garden is that it's productive. Firstly, I've got my notes up here as well. If you press P, you get to see the notes. So, oopsie, you can see I've got notes for each of the slides. Just press key P, and then you get the notes come up. So, the harvest, it doesn't have to be edible. It can, the majority of it normally is. It's fruits, nuts, leaves, shoots, rhizomes, fungi, all sorts. But you can also harvest crops such as wood. This is a willow. I'm not terribly sure which one. This is a willow in a kind of willow area that we have. The idea was to use it for baskets, and that's kind of taking a bit of a back seat at the moment. But you can use you have more medicinal plants, herbs, dye plants. It doesn't really matter. It's a productive. The idea. It's a productive space. That's the key thing. And it's multi-layered. It's a productive space also in that it uses all the available space. So you're using all the layers, all the height, and in the ground, and over time as well. That you have a variety of harvests across diverse the year. Any questions along the way? Please do ping them into the chat, and I'll do my best to I'll do my best to answer them. There's a number down there that says 151. I'm not terribly sure if that's 151 people or what. It makes me a bit nervous, but there we go. I'll press on. So, definition for a forest garden. The other characteristic is it's sustainable, and for me, this is the key thing about a forest garden. It's a closed loop system, and I looked it up on various sources. I can't find much literature about it, but it's an ecosystem essentially, and it provides its own nutrients and its own pest control. It's connected to the wider landscape quite definitely, but you don't have to have any human inputs into the garden. You're growing mineral accumulators and nitrogen fixers, plants, which provide the nutrients. You're providing habitat for the wildlife predators. You're providing food source for the wildlife predators, which will predate on the pests that you get on your crops, so that you get a balanced ecosystem. And this is what we're aiming at. It takes a while to get there, but this is what we're going for. So what you end up with is a system where it requires minimal input from humans, yet you're getting a crop, and the majority of the work is harvesting. I think harvesting, pruning, and mowing are the main jobs once you've got that space established. And you can see on the photograph here, this is a little patch I have up above the polytunnel. It's got some raspberry canes, there's strawberry, ground cover, Chilean strawberry, I think, and there is ground ivy, Glaucoma heteracea. And there is such little maintenance on that spot. Now it's established, I'll weed it maybe once a year and just pull out a few bits of grass, and maybe there's an odd dock there or something. But really, it looks after itself, which is quite amazing. In other respects, how it's sustainable is that you're doing something positive as well. You are sequestering carbon. Not only are you encouraging life, but the trees, the perennials that you have in the forest garden, and all the organisms that live in your healthy soil, they all sequester carbon. They all capture carbon. So you're not producing, it's carbon negative. And this is again something that you're aiming at, and you're encouraging biodiversity in the garden as well. So use native plants where possible. Excuse me. And this really addresses, on a very small scale, but this addresses the ecological and climate emergency. You're encouraging biodiversity and you're reducing your carbon footprint whilst producing food. Okay. And final characteristic is it's kind of side, it's not the main aim of a forest garden, but it's low maintenance. As I said before, the most maintenance I do in the forest garden, in those bits which are established, are harvesting, pruning fruit trees, cultivated fruit trees, and mowing grass paths, and that really is it. There is a bit of mulching that I do as well. I do chop and drop mulching. You can see the photograph here. About once or twice a year, I will chop the comfrey, and I'll plant comfrey next to each fruit tree. I'll chop the comfrey back and lay a mulch around the tree, and that provides enough nutrients for the apple tree. I've got a question here as well. It's a nice time to take a question. This is from I haven't got my glasses on. Excuse me if I pronounce this wrong. Bibla Petit. I can't really see it. Sorry. I have access to a piece of forest. Would it make sense to introduce new plants to it and start turning it into a food forest? There is already quite a lot of tree cover. So, firstly, I'm kind of a big proponent of native plants. Do you need, are you going to be using that space? Is it a good use of that space for you? In terms of the harvest, or is it best left being turned over to nature, and then you using a more cultivated, or a piece of land that's already cultivated? And my gut feeling is if it's a piece of wild forest, leave it as a wild forest, but it depends on the situation and the setup and how established the forest is. So my gut feeling is to go with it as a forest and let it do its forest thing. But if you do need to use it as a place to grow food for yourself, then yes, do turn it over to a food forest. There is a lot. It's a very different setup as well. If you're turning over a forest, it's an awful lot more work. It's a different kind of work. Quite often, what happens is with a lot of land, people will have a pasture, will have grassland, and then they're sheep mulching that and planting trees into that. Whereas with existing woodland, there's a lot of clearing that needs to be done to allow more light to come through, and then you have the issue with tree roots as well. So it's a whole other ball game. Again, if you can use turn a piece of grassland into a food forest, I think that would be preferable. Yeah. So it depends upon the nature of the woodland in the first place, and it depends upon what other access you've got to what other land as well. So hope that answers that question. A question about maintenance. Don't you encounter disease and lots of invasive pests in the garden? This is from Scott Inc. A44. Disease, yes, I get a bit of canker on the fruit trees, on the kind of cultivated fruit trees. Lots of invasive pests. Cabbage, I get cabbage white, butterflies, and there's slug damage. But not really what is noticeable in the parts of the garden that are established. There is way less damage, and I think it's my kind of motto, for example, with perennial vegetables, is to treat them as annual vegetables until they get established. So I've grown Turkish rocket, for example. I've tried growing that in a border from small plants, and that has been really hammered by slugs. And then I've grown it in a raised bed, in a kind of cultivated annual bed, got them established, and then I'm going to plant them out as a large clump, and that'll be better. So I think once the plants are established, once your perennials are up and running, you have far less problems with invasive pests. You do get things. You get I had sawfly infestation in one of my Italian alders, which knocked it back quite a bit. But you're actually better off. Yeah, I think with any kind of gardening, you're better off building the system up to deal with that rather than trying to eradicate the pests. The whole idea is that you build up an ecosystem. So I hope that answers that question. And then, okay, so there's a follow-on from Bilba Petite. I'll just clear the space under some furze in the garden. I basically have a flower bed unavailable under them. Yeah, so it's in the garden situation. Okay, yep. Yeah, well, that makes more sense then. Basically have a flower bed underneath them. Yes. Well, use that space. Yep. So I wasn't sure if you were talking, this is for Bibla Petite. I wasn't sure if you were talking about established woodland, but if it's in a kind of garden context, then I personally would be much happier using that space than as a forest garden. But you have got your work cut out, I would imagine, particularly if you're dealing with fir trees as well, because of the amount of shade and the kind of roots that you have in the soil. So yeah, good luck with that. Okay, I'm going to move on then with the guidelines. So So in terms of the characteristics of a forest garden, low maintenance, there's minimal weeding. No watering once the garden is established, unless of course you have annuals or you're growing things from seed, and there no digging, and there's no fertilizers or compost. You're using in situ composting, chop and drop mulching, as in the example here. And this for me is a bit for everyone really to to pay attention. Not saying that you're not paying attention already, but these I kind of come back to it time and time again. In the process of creating a forest garden over the past 5 years, these are the things that really have struck home. Protection, and that's in terms of essentially providing windbreak, and you're creating a microclimate. Yep, you're providing a safe space for young plants to get established, and that really is top of the list. Is quite literally top of the list. So whether it's planting a windbreak is what you're aiming for on all sides of your land. There is a really good. I've got all these links here off the talk. Go to an article. So I have an article about windbreaks. Oops, there it is. Yes, so there's an article which goes off each of these. Plants for a Future has a list of has a table of plants for a windbreak, and that's worth hunting out as well. There's probably a link somewhere. But windbreaks, critical. Higher at the back, higher on the north side, lower on the south side. Higher on the north and east, lower on the south and the west. That's the kind of rule of thumb. Nurse trees are trees that you plant in front of a fruit tree, for example, that provides protection. They're kind of sacrificial plants, really. You take them out once the fruit tree's got established. I've used broom quite a bit in the photograph here. This is a broom flower. They're short-lived. Member of the pea family, nitrogen fixing, and you plant 3 or 4 of them in front of a fruit tree, provides a bit of shelter for it. And dead hedges. We're on a very windy spot here, so I'm kind of retrofitting dead hedges, and these are temporary kind of constructions to protect vulnerable plants. There is a bamboo, Yashania anceps, I think it's called, which is hiding beneath this dead hedge here. Really simple construction, post in the ground, some brash in between. And it's actually really good a way of marking out where your plants are as well. So protection, absolutely vital. Spacing is the next thing. This is a plan view of trees, and the rule of thumb: quarter to a half of the average canopy diameter. So you've got 2 4-meter diameter trees. The spacing required between them to let enough light to come in for the plants below is 1 to 2 meters. So that is critical as well. You don't want too many plants. Layers, using all the layers in the forest garden. So canopy layer, shrubs and small trees, herbaceous perennials, ground cover, climbers, rhizome type plants, fungi. So there's a range of different. You're using all the available space. And ground cover. Ground cover is an easy win. It really does cut down on the amount of work. And to be honest, I now watch a gardening program, Gardener's World, and they'll have bare soil. And I go, what on earth are you doing with all that bare soil? Cover it up with plants now. So this is kind of one of the first things I really want to kind of do in a garden, is to get the ground covered. You can use bark is my favourite temporary mulch, and then you can use a temporary ground cover plant like white mustard as well. And then nutrients. I've just created a new article called about nutrients, and just a rough kind of guide about nitrogen fixers and potassium plants. So essentially comfrey, alder, and members of the pea family, and they provide nutrients for the whole of the garden. Okay, so those are the principles. So in a smaller forest garden, the idea is it's the same principles, but you are magnifying everything. So everything is magnified. So use those guidelines, use those the kind of defining characteristics, and then just apply them to a smaller space. That's it. There's no magic here. So everything is magnified. This is a glorious hoverfly that I saw. I think, is that oregano? I can't remember. So your garden design principles are the same but magnified, and this applies to that. This is something I covered in previous workshops and talks and stuff, but the aspect when you're designing a garden is critical. Which way your garden faces, and what the existing structures are, what the angle of the land is, where the water is, and that kind of thing, where the sun is in the sky and what light is coming through, and the plant size. So check the plant size when you plant for the final size. Don't cram stuff in. Leave space for plants to grow to their full size. Yeah, you'll get some things won't like it, won't grow as well as you thought they would. Some things might go too much, but try and get the right size plant for the right space, the right conditions, the right amount of light, but also the right space for that as well. I mean, I've got a client who has planted an Eleagnus abingii, like a car park plant. You'll know it, Oleaster, and he's planted it right next to a rose. And this is a big tree. This is a big kind of shrub. It's 4 or 5 meters, evergreen, slow growing, but it's big. And I just had to prune it back. And I'm kind of saying, well, you know, you ought to move it. Shouldn't really have planted it there in the first place. So look at the final size and the conditions. Always put the plant where it wants to be. Yeah. Look at the space, look at the soil, look at the moisture, look at the light, and see if that plant will grow there. And then there's the forest garden principles. So productive, sustainable, low maintenance. Okay. And related to all of this, I'm coming back to it, is the kind of the ecological emergency that we're facing, which is inextricably linked to the climate emergency. So 15% of species in the UK are under threat of extinction, and I think is a figure that will grow up as well. So we really need to get every garden, no matter if it's a forest garden or not, every garden needs to be a wildlife garden. You need to be thinking about encouraging wildlife. This seems counterintuitive. I know that Scott Inc. K44 said about invasive pests in the garden, and I think it seems counterintuitive, but you want to encourage pests in the garden, and then you want to encourage habitat and food sources for the predators. That's the key thing. Your job is to create a balanced ecosystem, so everything is kept in balance. You have a green fly infestation, you've got a healthy blue tip population to deal with that. This is a photograph of a goldfinch on a teasel head, and we've got a little story. We've got about half a dozen or so goldfinches, a flock, I guess you call them, which live near the house, and they've been flying around. But one of them has decided to become friends with the wing mirror on the car. So it perches on the wing mirror on the car and spends quite a lot of time there, and has been pooing down the side of the car door. So we've had to put a plastic bag over the wing mirror to encourage it to go and do something a bit more productive. Cool. Oh, what about slugs? So question from Bibi sorry about the pronunciation. Bibi La Petite. What about slugs? Oh, Bibi. Sorry. Yeah, I really I have got glasses, but they're not so good with the distance. What about slugs? Slugs are the bane of my life, because they are it's such a, generally, not for the past couple of weeks, it's been super dry here, but generally in West Wales it's very, very damp, and the slugs will eat everything. They have certain favourites, and there's certain plants that they'll leave alone, but any young plant is potentially at risk from slugs. So my what I would recommend is protect the plant from a slug. We had a we had a sweet chestnut called the variety is Numbo, and it's a seedling, so it's a tiny little tree. And I planted it out with a mulch, and I think I was a bit haphazard. There was bits of grass around, and it got absolutely hammered by slugs. So I had to clear everything out of the way. And it's kind of recovered from it. It's got multiple stems now, but it's fine. So the key lesson for me from that was to move the weeds out of the way, to let the plant get established, And I'd say weeds, I just mean plants that you don't want there. They're not weeds in that you don't want them, but you don't want them there because that's a home for slugs. So this is why on an annual vegetable patch people weed. They don't weed because they don't want the plants there. They weed because they don't want to have a habitat for slugs there. Once the a perennial plant is established, you're pretty much okay. The same thing happened to a blue bean sausage tree, Decasnia fargesii, I think it's called. Again, a small tree, and when it went in, is a small specimen, and that got hammered by slugs as well. And I had to replace it. But yeah, protect them first of all. Wait for them to get established. So, but then live with them. Oh, and also plant create a wildlife pond for frogs, and create habitat for toads. So I think like log piles in the corner of the garden, and open compost heaps I think are good for what they're good for. They're good for some wildlife. I think lizards possibly, but yeah, encourage slug eaters and hedgehog highways. I should do a wildlife workshop as well, but hedgehog highways, which is a gap in the fence at the bottom of the fence where it allows hedgehogs to go between gardens, so you're encouraging a healthy hedgehog population which will eat the slugs if you're in a built up area. So yeah, encourage slug predators and protect young plants. That's my advice for you, BB. Hope that's answered the question. Okay, so yeah, resilient wildlife garden. And let's move on. And the importance of native plants. There's a really interesting chap, Benjamin Vogt. Totally recommend. Oh, I've got this book here. Totally recommend that you have a read of this. It's quite hard going. It's from a North American perspective. He advocates planting native plants, and where he's from, that means prairie plants. But really, really interesting, and touches on the link between the oppression. The link between nature and humans, and the oppression of humans and the oppression of nature. So it's good stuff. And the other book I always recommend is Martin Crawford's Creating a Forest Garden, in case no one's heard of it. But totally recommend that one as well. Really, really good reference. Really good introduction. And the whole kind of reason. Oh, someone else as well, Douglas Tallamy. I'll just write his name down. There's some really good Douglas Tallamy. What's it called? Backyard. He's got a new book out. Really, really interesting bloke. Wildlife gardener. And talking about 2/3 for the birds is his little catchphrase that he's got for a campaign he's doing at the moment. So 2/3 native plants in your garden, and that provides food sources for the birds. So you get caterpillars and insects and all the creepy crawlies will go onto will feed off of the native plants because they've co-evolved with the plants, and that'll provide a food source for the bird population and for the higher the other animals in the garden. So another really, really good resource. Douglas Tallamy is really interesting, and a fantastic resource is the database. Search for host plants. It's a bit of an old-fashioned website. It's database of insects and their food plants, but you can select a plant, and it will tell you what insects will feed on that particular plant. So Campanula, one at random, and it will give you a list of the different insects that will use that plant as a host plant and will feed from that plant. So this is I kind of use this in combination with planting plans when I'm designing a garden, and I want to get a native plant. I'll actually see how many species of insect that it will support, and that will inform part of my decision. So that's database of insects and their food plants, which is a link there. And the other one, which is really good, are very, very handy. Apart from Plants for a Future, which I'm sure everyone, hopefully people have heard of. Very, very good database of useful plants. Another great one is actually the very slow RHS plant finder online. So you can search for, my mind's gone completely blank, you can search for hawthorn, for example, and there is a native filter on the search facility. So you can actually say, well, there's plenty of hawthorns, but I want to have one which is yeah, it is slow. There's a lot going on, but you can say I want to select hawthorns that are native, and there will eventually one day there'll be a checkbox come up here, but not today. Maybe not today. Oh yes, here we go. So native to the United Kingdom, filter, and it'll just show you the two native ones, Crataegus monogena and Midland hawthorn. Can't remember what that one's called. And there we go. This blank space, I'll just leave it ticking over there. Oh, it seems such a shame to leave it, but yeah. Oh, there we go. Oh, I'm like Levigata, Midland hawthorn. So those are the two native hawthorns. Hawthorns are great, by the way. I mean, I'll come on to them in a minute. How are we doing for time? 41. Cool. So, very good resources. So, quote from Benjamin Vogt about gardening with native plants, and I think what is a central point as well is that individually, operating on an individual basis, we can have an effect on our environment and the plants that we grow and the wildlife that immediately surrounds us. But what is also as important is how it connects us with other people and with the wider landscape. So hopefully by connecting with native plants and with nature through a forest garden, you are compelled to participate, to become active, and in terms of the ecological and the climate emergency, that you get involved in whatever way you can. I do think this is critical, and it's across the board. It's for everybody. It's everybody's job. It's the most pressing thing facing us. Okay. Anyway, enough of the political diktats. Small forest garden designs. I'm just gonna have a quick swig of tea. There's 3 designs here that I've done of forest gardens, and it's not it's to show the kind of spaces that you can turn into a forest garden. So hopefully you can get some ideas about what you can do with your spaces. So the first garden, my first forest garden design job, I think. Small garden in outside of Dublin, coastal, modern house, single story, loft rooms, 3 adults, cats and dogs, southwest facing, 15 metres by 50 metres front garden, 50 metres by 23 metres back garden. So, fair sized garden, but still, it's small in terms of forest gardening. And you get an idea of the actual space, and it's like a normal house in a normal garden. So I put together a plan, a very simple plan. This is like a real kind of basic plan. That's the view from the top. You can see the driveway, front garden, and back garden. South is this way, and north up there. And just trying to work out where the sun is in relation to the garden, and then some ideas for the planting, dividing the garden into 2 with a path with a hedge. Actually, it's a currant bush hedge, and then a hazel in the corner. I think there's a couple of apples as well. But it's just to get an idea that you can have a forest garden in a small space. And what you're actually doing, it's the same principles. So you apply the principles, but you scale everything down. The second example is a semi-detached 1930s house in Llandilo. There was a 10 meters by 7 meters space, and I put together a plan, which was essentially it's a cherry tree, and around there'll be a cherry tree in the center, fruit bushes at the front, salt bush on this. This is a salt bush at this side, kind of Mediterranean herbs here in the full sun, and a cherry tree in the middle. So it doesn't have to be, and then there's the green ground cover. So the point is here, it doesn't have to be like hundreds of trees. It just has to be the principles apply to that space. And there's a plan. So one big tree in the middle, fruit bushes along the front, sunny herbs along the back, and a seat in the corner, and then a salt bush hedge along the side. And the third example is a big Victorian terraced house in North London, kind of family of 4 and a cat, west-facing back garden. And the idea here, it's a used space, but what I've actually managed to do, this is kind of interesting. They wanted to keep a fig. There's this side over here. There's a big Leylandii, which I still think hasn't been taken down yet. But they want to take that down because that's blocking out a lot of the light from the west. So that, and I was saying, replace that with a small hawthorn, which is 4 meters by 4 meters for wildlife, and then an Italian alder. And you'd be kind of surprised at how a relatively small garden can actually have a big tree. It's on the north boundary, and with some trees you can raise the canopy, it's called, which is where you take off the lower branches, and then you can you can take off the lower branches, and it lets in more light, so you can actually have a high canopy up. You can have the tree there, but it's not casting much shadow at all on the garden. So you've got some kind of flexibility over your Chelsea plants. So look at the habit of the plant that you're using as well. And then they have a fig tree that they wanted to keep, and a cherry tree that they wanted to keep, and I put in a damson and a couple of an apple and a crab apple. And both of them are on semi-dwarfing rootstock, which I'll come to in a second. So plants for a smaller garden. Good. Plants for a smaller garden. So principles are the same, as I was saying before. Same ideas, using layers, having protection, providing nutrients for the whole of the garden. Same guidelines, same principles. Use the same patterns, but you just use smaller plants for that space. So the world really is your oyster. If you use the database on Plants for a Future, let me just quickly find Plants for a Future. Dunk. You can find oh, it's going super slow today. You can find different species that will fit your situation. So say you wanted to have a hawthorn. Oh, there's one here. Say you wanted to have a hawthorn. You can actually check the height of the hawthorn and choose the one that fits the space. So this is a page about hawthorns, the whole kind of as a genus, and then it will say there is a small one, Crataegus barusana. So doesn't grow taller than 5 foot, for example. So use the RHS plant finder, use Plants for a Future, look at the final sizes, and just choose a scaled down version. And you can use fruit bushes as well. And what's interesting about fruit bushes is in full sun, they're kind of relatively compact, whereas if you get them into a bit of shade, they'll get leggier and they'll get taller. They won't have as much fruit, but they're still there. They're still providing a harvest. And then there's a vast range of perennial veg and ground cover as well. I've just realised I haven't. I am recording. That is good. So for perennial veg and ground cover, so perennial veg, Plants for Future is a really good kind of resource for looking at different sizes and conditions that they require. In terms of suppliers, there's Alison at Backyard Larder. She's great. I like her. And Mandy at Incredible Vegetables. I'm sure people have heard of them before, but I'll put the names down here. They've both got websites. They kind of they've sold out. They're selling out very quickly at the moment. And a Facebook group I love it is called Edimentals. A guy called Stephen Barstow, who's fantastic. Edimentals.com, I think it is. And they've got a Facebook group as well. I'll pop that in. So, yeah, have a look. Massive range of perennial vegetables. It's incredible. And then look at and shrubs and edible shrubs as well. There's a lot. There's an awful lot of choice out there. And choose something that suits your situation. I mean, the world is your oyster. And then with trees, as I was saying before, you can actually get a tree to fit any space. Now, for people that don't know, first off, use a smaller tree. Use Plants for Future or RHS Plant Finder and find a smaller tree. So, like for example, as I said before, hawthorns or pepper trees, Szechuan pepper. As a Xanthoxylum is the name of the genus. Xanthoxylum. And they're relatively small trees as well, quite fragrant too. They're kind of nice trees, spiny though, so a little bit, watch out for them. But look for smaller trees. They don't have to be 25-meter trees or 30-meter tall trees. You can get smaller trees, kind of shrubs. So hazel as well. I think a Turkish hazel is smaller than the native hazel. And dwarfing rootstocks. I've got a link here. I have a link off of this for an article. But for cultivated fruit trees, so apples, pears, plums, and cherries, you can get different size rootstocks. And a rootstock is where it determines the height and the vigor of the tree. So here we've got quite a bit of space. We have MM106 for an apple, for example, which is about 4 meters high by 4 meters diameter. Whereas for a smaller garden, you'd want a semi-dwarf rootstock or a dwarfing rootstock or a very dwarf rootstock. So an M26, an M9, or an M27. And the same for like whether you have a cherry and or a plum or a pear. So yeah, you can have a tree in your garden. If even in a very small space, you can have a trained fruit tree. So you can espalier a tree where you train it horizontally, and you get more fruit from a horizontal branch. It's more work to do, but you can do it. You can have a fruit tree in a very small space. And the other one is pollarded trees. So small-leaved lime, you pollard it, which basically means you crop it at about 5 foot high, and then once every few years you'll take the branches back, and then you're just keeping the crop in this area here. You're not letting it go to its full 20-25 meters. And the same thing with bay trees too. So oops, you've got a bit of lag here. So bay trees are they're easy to prune, and you can keep them kind of small and shaped in a small space. Don't go for something that just keeps on growing, because it will be a lot of work to keep it to keep it pruned and to keep it small. So, and just as an example of the trees that I've chosen for the London garden, the design I did in London, So yep, Turkish hazel, a broad-leaved cockspur thorn, which is a hawthorn, a small buddleia, a small crab apple, dwarfing rootstock for the apple, and semi-dwarfing rootstock for the damson, dwarf comfrey. So everything's kind of scaled down, and you choose a smallest species. So, just want to end up and say, no matter the size, garden for everyone. So this really is your gardening for not just for yourself, not just for your family, but for future generations and for wildlife. So you're gardening with everybody in mind. You're thinking more than about yourself and just about how your garden looks. You're thinking about a multitude of things. So any other questions before I move out into the garden? Oh, that's the end, and there's an appendix at the end as well. So that's good. Right then, fantastic. I hope that was interesting. I shall now swap out into the garden. I'm going to go out with my mobile phone, and then I'm going to go and plant up a pot as a small miniature forest garden, a mini forest garden. So thank you very much. Oh, so we've got a question from Scotting A44. In the urban gardens you designed, how did the ecosystem bit work? The ecosystem part works by choosing plants that provide for different for different animals, for different ecological filling in different ecological niches. So on that plan there is an open compost heap, there is a hedgehog highway, there is a hawthorn in the corner, there is a log pile, there's a stone pile, there's a miniature wildlife pond. So you've got lots of features in there that's providing habitat. And then the choice of plants, there are non-native plants in there, but there are also native plants too. So trying to balance that, trying to get native plants where possible to provide a host, to provide food for to be a host plant for insects. If there is not wildlife around, how will the garden be found by hedgehogs? I don't know. I think you want to encourage hedgehogs. This is part of like planning. I think this is a kind of general question, a broader question about planning on a larger scale, so that you're not just concerned about your garden, you talking to your neighbours, and you're encouraging people to have a wildlife garden, so that you then bring the wildlife in. I think the more people that do it, the more wildlife will come in, so it will eventually be found. If there is food there, it will eventually be found by wildlife. So yeah, we need to encourage the wildlife to be around, I think, is the answer to that one. Hope that's answered that question. Okay, right then. I'm going to go have a brief intermission now. Okay, good. And I shall come back. I'll reappear on the screen in about 5 minutes. So just give me a chance to do the swap over. Okay, thank you very much everyone for watching. I hope that's useful, and I have managed to record it this time as well. Okay, I'll catch up with you soon. Cheers, bye. Greetings and welcome. This is the second part of the online forest garden workshop, the small forest garden. I'm sorry, I did the live stream and it didn't record, it only recorded a minute of it. So I'm just doing it again, going over the process that I did the first time. So this is the, let's switch the camera around. This is the mini forest garden. Now, the mini forest garden started out as a big tub. I was given a couple of tubs by a next door neighbour, an ex next door neighbour whose family has had to move to Spain, unfortunately, because of Brexit. So our loss. But I did get some tubs from him before he went, which is very kind of him. I filled these up with topsoil. I had some old turf that I've covered up for a few months, and I used that to fill it in. Otherwise it costs an absolute bloody fortune if you use shop bought compost, and then I put a layer of shop bought compost about a couple of inches thick. And the idea of that is to stop the weed seeds from germinating, so it makes it a bit easier. So this is what I started off with, and I've buried it a couple of inches into the ground down here, so that it gets more water from the ground. What you can do is set up a wicking system. I have seen them. I've never built one, but you have a water container up here, and then a rope goes into the pot, and water wicks in and keeps the soil damp. But because this is next to the polytunnel and I have a propagation areas up here as well, I'm always around with a hose, keeping all the pots watered. So wherever you have a pot, you need to think about watering it. And this is my mini forest garden. This is one I made earlier. I tried to show you. Now, I'll just go through the plants. There is a bare root apple tree on a dwarfing rootstock. This is a present from a friend of mine, Martin. He doesn't know what the tree is, what the cultivar is, and you can see, I think that is a scion there, and this is the rootstock. So the rootstock determines the height and the vigour of the fruit tree, and in this case, I think, is it an M27? I'd have to look it up. I can never remember the names for them. M20 is a dwarf rootstock, which will need to be staked. I won't do it just yet. And you put the stake on the side of the prevailing wind, which is this way. So you put a stake in and attach it low down on the rootstock itself, not above the graft. But below the graft, and that needs to be staked permanently. You don't need to stake anything above a semi-dwarfing rootstock if you put in a young tree. If you put in an established, a mature tree, then you will need possibly to stake it for longer. But anything that goes in as a young tree on above a semi-dwarfing rootstock, you don't need to stake them. And make a hole just big enough for the roots, so it gives it some purchase. Now for ground cover, so that's my canopy layer. This will grow to about 1.5 meters, and that'll be my canopy layer in this pot. And then there isn't really a shrub layer, but I have got herbaceous perennials and also mineral accumulators. This is one of my favourite plants. This is a dwarf comfrey. There's a couple of comfreys called dwarf comfrey. This one is Symphytum ibericum, which is Iberian comfrey. Beautiful flowers on it. I've propagated this from root cuttings. Really, really easy to propagate. Slugs do like it when it's young, so do beware. I have a whole bed of it there. That started off as 5 plants, £5 a piece, £25 I paid, and now it covers about half an acre all around the forest garden. So really, honestly, get yourself propagation beds. It's way cheaper. So I've got a couple of those at the back, and the leaf fall from these will provide nutrients for the apple tree. And then for the ground cover, I have got, you can just about see down here, this is Rubus pentalobus. And it's emerald carpet, very low growing, does require weeding, but because it's such a small area, the weeding really isn't much of an issue. Also known as Taiwanese bramble or Taiwanese raspberry, and I've got a couple dotted around here, and that should slowly form a mat of evergreen around here, and then these they'll get quite big. They'll clump up and they'll kind of fill out, so I might have to remove some of them later on, so to stop them taking over totally. And I've also put in a wild ramson, Allium ursinum ramsons, wild garlic, which is, you eat the leaves. When you cook with the leaves, put them in at the end because the flavour goes very quickly. So just kind of wilt them basically. So I put a couple of them in
as well. And then that is my mini forest garden. I do need to give it a water, and I might add bits more. Oh, and there's a skirret as well. I've never grown skirret before. This is like a carrot, kind of carroty, cross between a carrot and a parsnip. Smaller roots, smaller than a carrot, and parsnip, but very tasty apparently. I just popped it in because I had it. So I'll try out different plants across the year and see how we go. Might put some flowers in there as well. So there we have it. This is my finally I just put in a mulch. I've run out of bark, so I just put leaf. I got some old leaves that I swept up from the track, and I'll just use those as a mulch. I'll give it a bit of a water, stake in that apple tree, and there we go. That's my miniature forest garden. Isn't it resplendent? So I hope that's useful. And yeah, take the same ideas of the forest garden principles and guidelines and apply them to whatever size space that you're using to grow edible crops with nature. So I hope you found that useful, and I'll post this up online with the other video, which was me talking through the slideshow for a small forest garden. Do get in touch if you would like to suggest any ideas for online workshops. I'd also like to get some sort of working with other people, looking at their spaces, rather than just me talking about this is my forest garden, this is what I think about forest gardening. It'd be great if other people could get involved, and we can have a walk through and a talk through of someone else's designs and someone else's space, because that I think would be more educational, or more kind of help more people than me talking about the space that I've got. So if you're interested in that, do get in touch. I'll try and sort something out, some sort of more interactive workshop, and someone else doing some camera work and talking about their space and their ideas. That'd be fab if you could do that. So email me, jake@forestgarden.wales. Hope that's useful, and I shall see you next Wednesday, 10 o'clock, British summertime, next Wednesday. Okay, cheers, bye.